Welcome to the Conscience of Kansas radio show with Paul A. Ibbetson, a no-nonsense conservative talk show that looks at the local, state, and national issues that affect the people of Kansas. And now, here's Paul A. Ibbetson.
All right, radio listeners. Today we have a very special guest in Tim Carney. Tim Carney is a lobby editor and a columnist at the Washington Examiner. He's the author of Obamanomics, How Barack Obama is Bankrupting You and Enriching His Wall Street Friends, Corporate Lobbyists, and Union Bosses. And Tim Carney would like to welcome you to the Conscience of Kansas radio program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, we are very excited. Folks are very excited to hear you talk about this book. And I was wondering if you could tell our Conscience of Kansas listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this book project to make this book, Obamanomics.
Yep, I am, as you said, the lobbying editor and a columnist at the Washington Examiner. But back in 2004 or so, I got on the beat of following how business often lobbies for and profits from more government regulation and taxes, not to mention, of course, spending and handouts. And so I wrote a book in 2006 called The Big Ripoff, How Big Business and Big Government Steal Your Money. And then was working for the Examiner when the Wall Street bailouts came rolling in, and that just made it clear to me that this topic of how big business is not a bunch of, free market cowboys, and how big government doesn't really curb the power of business but often enhances it, became clear to me that that was a more important topic now than ever. And then as I started to follow Obama's record and compare it to the rhetoric where he says he's crusading against, the special interests, but then I saw these guys lining up, the big businesses lining up behind so many of his proposals. I said, I got to put this all together into a book and show that it's a pattern. Yeah,
well, it's very interesting. I wanted to say right off the bat that we here at the Conscience of Kansas radio program appreciate that you dedicated your book to Bob Novak. Bob Novak has really influenced so many people, and we've talked to a lot of his proteges, such as David Freddoso and others that have been affected. So we appreciate that just on the get-go. But on your book, Obamanomics, what I think is interesting, there's a lot of books on Obama that are out there, and there's a lot of different narratives that people, make assertions that he's a socialist and he's this and he's that. What it seems to me is interesting and what makes your book, Obamanomics, interesting is that you're kind of coming from a different perspective in how you're illuminating Barack Obama. If I'm correct, you're looking at it from the position of, he's not per se separating himself from the corporate lobbyists and the union bosses and Wall Street. He's in bed with them with his own agenda. Is that correct in any way?
Well, the way I would put it is he's not trying to, he's not anti-business. He doesn't hate business. He wants there to be a partnership between business and government. So a lot of conservatives see Obama's rhetoric and how anti-business he often talks, and then they see his record and shows how much regulation he wants, how much government influence and industry he wants, and they conclude that he wants sort of a government takeover of the economy. And I put it differently. He wants the government to have more control of the economy, but he wants to do it in partnership, sort of using the power of business to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And a great example is the way he's dealing with health care right now, where his bill that he's pushing that's in the Senate right now, it's not exactly how he would have drafted it, but it would effectively subsidize health insurance companies, hospitals, and drug companies. It would force us to buy health insurance that's more expansive than we might otherwise buy, and it would subsidize them with taxpayer dollars. And so he's sending more taxpayer money to big businesses, but also giving them more rules, telling them what they have to do and what they can't do. And the big businesses are fine with this. They get subsidized, and they're happy to play with by the rules. It's a new business, a small business, that doesn't get a chance to enter into the market because of the costs of the new regulations. And it's the consumers and the taxpayers who pay the price. So that sort of collusion of business and government is not a, Ralph Nader or a communist anti-business thing, but it's also not a pro-free market.
Right. Very interesting. Now, does that same philosophy dovetail in with the bailouts as far as affecting new businesses that would want to come in?
Yeah, and this was with Bush bailing out the Wall Street firms and and Detroit, and Obama following up and sort of ramping those up. When you keep poorly run businesses from failing, what you're doing is you're taking away opportunity for other things to come into its place. It's like you prune a bush by chopping off some of the ends of the branches. You pull off the dead leaves on a lot of your plants so that the energy can go into more promising growth. Right. In the economy, when a business fails, it's not like everything it had disappears into nothingness. There are assets that are valuable that could be bought up. You see a little bit of this with with AIG selling off some of its valuable assets, but then you get GM being kept alive, and you're wondering, why is this happening? And so you're keeping entrepreneurs from coming in and taking advantages of opportunities by propping up failed businesses.
Absolutely. It seems like you're subverting the free market then at that point, because you're not allowing failed companies to fail and new ones to come in and do it right. It sounds like to me what you're making is a sort of a Milton Friedman argument of how that process works. One of the things I thought was interesting in your book is you can, like you said, you can turn on the television on any channel where Barack Obama is talking right now, and at some point or another, he will talk about how he's not adhering to the special interest groups. He's not going to, not going to get in bed with the fat cat, whatever. He ties fat cat into every term. But your book talks about, and we saw this in the primary. In the primary, you heard this over and over again through different commercials and different times. Barack Obama would say, my movement, the Barack Obama movement, is a grassroots movement for the little man. It's the little man that is propelling me financially, going to propel me with votes. And as opposed to that evil John McCain over here is getting all this special interest money, big business money. Your book says that's not really the way that hashed out.
No, I ignored Obama's rhetoric and looked at the actual numbers. Obama raised more from Wall Street by far than any other candidate in history, especially more than John McCain. He raised more from the drug makers than any other candidate in history, and he raised more from the insurance companies than any other candidate in history. You look at all the biggest companies. You ask somebody, what do you think of when you think of big business? They might say Exxon, they might say Pfizer, they might say Goldman Sachs, they might say General Electric, Boeing, Microsoft. All of those companies, they gave more to Obama's campaign. The people working there gave more to Obama's campaign than they gave to McCain's campaign, often by huge ratios. Like Microsoft and Google, I think it was 8-1 and 10-1. Gave more to Obama's campaign. And the fact that even ExxonMobil, an oil company, gave more. Now, and what I say in the book, I write clearly in Obamanomics that I don't say that this means Obama has been bought off. I don't say this means Obama is doing the bidding of these big donors. But I do say it shows that they realized that he was not their enemy. Many of these businesses realized that his big business proposals would actually help them. So we don't have to get into motives to see a connection between the campaign contributions and Obama's policy.
Well, yeah, and it blows that narrative that still is running today out of the water. And
it's amazing how little fact-checking every reporter who does that, who repeats that narrative does. Right,
and I think it's interesting because your book is one of the few books that's really focusing on that and looking at that. Now, environmentalism, ClimateGate, all of this global warming stuff that's going on. What does your book talk about that? We hear the narrative from Barack Obama that, they're trying to curb this reckless and dangerous industrial system. And, I sort of this getting back to our natural state and all this stuff. What is really happening?
Well, one thing that gets left out of most of the media stories, and certainly out of Obama's way of telling it, is that there are many of the biggest businesses have positioned themselves to profit off of climate legislation.